Good morning, everybody. So in the complicated world of the Church of England, 16,000 churches supported by the 42 dioceses, and the 42 dioceses are supported by a small central team, and I'm part of that central buildings team. I lead on environmental matters for our church buildings. So my daily working life is trying to think through how we're going to move away from oil and gas heating, where and when is it appropriate to have solar panels on church roofs, how are we going to draft-proof drafty church doors, and then thinking about the biodiversity of church grounds. And I'm kind of the person who sits in the middle, trying to find resources and share them, develop webinars and get those out there, write central policy. So that's who I am and where I fit into things. Before I dive in, I'm going to ask Claire if she can launch the little poll that we've got to ask you what it is at the moment that are the biggest barriers to your church making change. So just pick the single biggest, oh, that might be tricky, trying to narrow it down to one, whichever one you think is the biggest barrier, and we'll have a look at the results for that. How's it going, Claire? Have most people answered? What does it tell us? That's interesting. So the biggest single barrier is getting agreement within the church itself. What else is it telling? So 27% is about getting agreement within your own church. And then it's about finding the money, knowing where to start, finding the right advice and getting permission. And interesting, of course, that it's spread between all of those things, because what we find is that for any church project to get off the ground, you need to have all of these things. For a big scale church project to go ahead, you've got to have the passion, have the time, have the money, have the advice, and have the permission. And any one of those not being in place is what can stop a project in its tracks. Right, so my task, what I've been asked to do, is basically to save you time by showing you where the key resources are that are out there to help you. So I'm hoping that by the end of my 15 minutes, I've saved you a few hours of Googling, trying to find good resources and knowing where they are out there on the internet. So if I share my screen, then hopefully what you will now be seeing is a Google Doc that has a whole bunch of resources. Has that appeared, Liz? Lovely. And I can put the link to this document into the chat. I think I can. And then you will all have access to it. And we'll also send it out. Presumably there's an email going out after the conference with a bunch of things. So we'll make sure you've got this as an attachment as well. Don't worry, I'm not going to read every link out to you. But if I show you what I did for this conference was I started putting together this list of resources. The ones I knew of came to 2 pages of A4, and I then put it out to the network of diocesan environment officers who told me about loads of things that I'd forgotten or didn't know were out there. And it's ended up as 3 sides of A4 of really useful resources that are freely available online for churches. And I'm going to show you a few of the key ones so that you know what's there to help you. The first one is this page here, which is our Church of England landing page for everything to do with net zero carbon. Now, I know some of you joining here today aren't from the Church of England, but of course you're absolutely welcome to use our resources, and a building is a building. It doesn't care which denomination you're from. So the net zero carbon church page, when you go in there, what you'll find is this picture of a church, the outside of a church, the inside of a church. And you can click on each of the things and it will take you through, show you a little bit of information about that, and then link you through to wherever the more detailed guidance is about that topic. It also shows you, as links through the practical path I'm about to show you, a really useful video, a little bit about what needs permission in terms of works, and then where you can get advice and our webinar program. So if you're sort of thinking, where's one place which I should go and look at after today about net zero carbon buildings, this is the one that I would go to first. What that will take you through to is the practical path to net zero. And this is 2 sides of A4. When you go onto the page, you'll see you can click through and find the 2 sides of A4, which is, all right, practically, what do we do with our buildings? And it takes you through, firstly, where do we start? So these are the kind of no regret things any church could do. Where do we go next? getting to zero, and then the only if, things you do in particular circumstances. And this is what I'm going to be spending my webinar talking about. So I'm not going to go into any more detail than that now. When you go into that page, you'll also find that there is a self-guided checklist that you can download. So after today, if you want to, you can go in there, find that self-guided checklist, and then it takes you, you basically do a walk around of your church, and for each of the points on the practical path, it asks you to tick, is this not applicable to you? Is it something you've already done? Is it something you need advice about? Is it a priority? So it's a way of getting quickly to a sense of an action plan for your church. Other things that we've got in terms of net zero, we've got a range of really useful case studies on our website of churches that have gone and done things so that you can look at the practicalities of how they did it. We've got our webinar program. If you haven't found this yet, I'd really recommend having a look at our net zero webinars. There's a range of topics on there that should be really helpful to you. They start with forming your team, action planning, and defining and measuring net zero. And any ones like that have been in the past, the videos are on there, so you can click through and watch them. And the ones which are yet to come, you'll find the booking links. Then we've got a positive vision of net zero carbon church for your building, learning from others, and one that's coming up later in the year about conservation pitfalls. And I think this will be really of interest to anyone who's got a listed building or historic interiors. This is about that sweet spot where you can do the right thing environmentally and the right thing for the conservation of your building. And then we've got the slightly more technical side. And whenever I book one of these webinars, I'd say to the speakers, I want it to be a technical briefing for non-technical people. So it's taking you from zero and getting you a good understanding of that subject. We've got the two different ones on heating. So to replace or not replace your existing heating system. And then what's the best heating solution if you're going to replace. Housekeeping quick wins. If you only watch one of the webinars, watch this one. It's about where to start, things that are going to save you money and save energy really quickly. Lighting, solar, electric car charging, and we've got a new one coming up that's running in July on heat pumps, because that's such a relevant topic. And then we've got two new ones that have just gone on the website yesterday, day before yesterday, about environmental fundraising. And these are going to be running in September. So we've got one which is about what funding sources are out there, and then the other is how to approach them, how to approach your fundraising. You'll also find links here through to our webinar program on land and nature, and you'll find links through to our EcoChurch webinars. Right, where am I? So then we've got our heating section on the website, and that takes you through to really useful guidance on heating and also case studies. So you've got things like a case study of a church that's moved away from oil onto electric heating. You've got a case study of a church that's put in place a heat pump. We've got our energy efficiency, quite a few other things. I'm not going to go through them one by one. You can look at them afterwards. Dropping down to the next section, there's two really useful carbon footprinting tools. One, if you're Church of England, is the energy footprint tool, and the other is the 360 carbon tool, which is open to churches of any denomination and is broader and includes energy, transport, food, procurement, everything. And Matt's webinar, which is on carbon footprinting, we'll look at those in a lot more detail, so I will skip on by. If you want advice, more technical advice about your buildings, I would always start by having a look at Historic England. This link takes you through to their guidance, and this one takes you through to their webinar program. They've had some really useful, they have them called them Technical Tuesdays, where they'll take an issue like windows, and they'll look for an hour at how we're going to tackle our old windows. SFAB also has some really useful guidance, particularly for older buildings, on things like how to do loft insulation appropriately in an older building without causing damp and condensation. Of course, if you're Church of England, reaching out to your DAC is really important, and there's a link here if you don't already know your local DAC. We're often asked, where do we get advice from? And these links here are to the most common places that I'm sending people to for advice. The first of which is, if you're thinking what we're going to do about our heating, then you probably want a building services engineer, and you can find a directory on the CIBSE website, which will you put in your location and it'll show you local advisors, building services engineers. The reason it's useful to get a building services engineer rather than a local installer is that often if you're approaching a local installer, they might give you advice that's free, but they're often trying to sell you one particular solution. where a building services engineer, yes, you need to pay for that advice, but they will give you, a whole range of different options. And then the second is solar panels. We get a lot of questions about solar panels because churches often have fabulous roofs facing the right direction and pitched. So this directory here takes you through to the MCS, which is where you can search for a local accredited installer. And I would always advise you to go to an accredited installer. And generally, they will always give you a free desktop survey before charging you any money. They'll look at the building from Google Maps, and that'll give them enough information to be able to give you a free desktop survey. And then if that's looking like it's something you want to take forward, then they'll come out and start visiting site. Funding. It's already come up today. Where is the money going to come from? So there is no easy answer to that. There is no big pot of money just sitting there waiting for us to make changes to our buildings. We all know how difficult it is to fundraise for our buildings, but we've done it in the past for things like putting in place disabled access to our buildings, putting in place new kitchens and bathrooms. So it's the same here. It's that same fundraising process. There is a grants directory on our website. If you go into parish resources, it takes you into this page here, which as it loads, this is our charitable grants directory, and there's a whole section in there on environmental and sustainability projects with several pages of funders that you can look at. These things can go out of date very quickly, so we're just in the process now of updating it again, and there should be a new edition by the summer. There's also on the Parish Resources website a really useful suite of guides all about fundraising. So if you're new to fundraising and this is not something you've done before, then if you go into the Parish Resources website, you'll find all of their different guides and videos and resources all about how to plan your fundraising campaign. The other thing locally, so what I've shown you in terms of the grants directory only has national funds because otherwise it would become an unfeasibly long document. So in terms of finding local grants, where I would start is to see if you've got a local CVS, Council for Voluntary Services, in your area. They are the umbrella body there to help charities, and they will normally have a free searchable database of grants which are relevant in your part of the country. And it's also worth finding out whether your local council has a sustainability officer. They might not have that job title, that's what they're called where I live, the sustainability officer, and they will often know about grants that your council might have or other local grants. The 2 CV webinars, as I just said, they're coming up on fundraising. Please do book onto those. And one very specific that's open at the moment that I think is really interesting is if you want to do community engagement. The Church of England is a member of the Climate Coalition, and the Climate Coalition is calling on people to run events as part of Great Big Green Week in September in the run up to COP. And to make it really easy for people to do that, they are offering small grants for you to run events. So I'd have a look at that and see if it's something you might want to do. Because that coincides with Creation Tide, quite a lot of churches might be planning events anyway, and possibly this is a way to fund that event and perhaps make it a little bit more ambitious. Right, how am I doing for time? I've got another few minutes, haven't I? Transport, there's some useful links in here if transport is an issue you want to look at your church. I really like this little carbon footprint transport calculator, which allows you to put in your journey with a small car or a big car or by train or by bus, and you can say, what if it was an electric car? And you can see the difference that it makes. If you want to look into lift share, to encourage people to lift share, there's websites for that. There are grants for EV car charging, and I've put the link in here. Land and nature, mostly I've been asked to focus about net zero, so I might rush at this point, but there's some really, really good stuff out there about land and nature. We have a whole webinar program coming up in June with different topics all about churches and nature, about trees and about outdoor worship and about everything you can think of to do with land and nature. Please click through and have a link. And that is linked through to the Church's Count on Nature project, which is happening in June, where it's a citizen science, where people from the local community can come into the church and record the species that they see. Those records then go through into the National Biodiversity Network, and from there into the Church Heritage Records, so we can get really good information about ecology. And that Church's Count on Nature project is open to any church. Please have a look at it. It's a partnership between ourselves, Arosha UK, and Caring for God's Acre and the Church of Wales. Caring for God's Acre have got loads of really good free resources about churchyard management, and they have a free starter pack which they will send you if you contact them, so have a look at them. There are some other useful things to look at later in there. Overall frameworks for church action, of course, eco-church. We absolutely support eco-church. We think it is a brilliant, practical, step-by-step framework that allows churches to take action across the breadth of the environmental activities that they have. And the eco-church website has lots of resources. We also on our own website have a whole group of case studies of churches taking action. There's also, it's useful to know if your church is considering making a climate emergency declaration, there is a toolkit to help you do that with a link here through to that. If you want to think about how do individuals within the church community take action, creation care is a really good approach that you can look at. There's also Count Us In, which has the 16 highest impact steps that an individual can take to cut their carbon or inspire other people to do the same. And if you want a footprint calculator for individuals, the WWF one is a good place to start. There's some, for those of you who are linked to local schools or have youth groups, there's some relevant resources here for that. There's so much out there in terms of worship and music. I'm not going to click through on them, but just know that there's already a lot of resources compiled to help you with worship and music. And the main place I would start is by looking at the Climate Sunday website, where they have they've just got everything set out really clearly there. In the run up to COP26 specifically, Climate Sunday, that's already been mentioned, is the main focus. We're calling on churches to hold a climate related service between now and COP. There's going to be a youth relay that's walking from Cornwall to G7 up to COP26 in Glasgow. If the route of that goes anywhere near your church, why don't you find out whether there's a way that you can link to that and support it as it goes past. And if you want more information about the Faith Voice in the run-up to COP and what we're calling for, have a look at the Make COP Count group here. Oh, there's so much. There's campaigns, there's our website. If you want to sign up for our newsletter and get regular information about the environment programme, it's here. For the Methodists, it's here. Building resources, a lot of procurement resources to help you through parish buying if there are things you're needing to purchase, like green energy, LED lights, solar panels. There's a section here about ethical investment, if that's something that you want to understand more about what the approach is from the Church Commissioners and the Pension Board and CCLA. And there's a few here at the end which are external resources, ones which I think are really useful. So these are from secular organisations, but they're incredibly valuable. How to engage with your politicians, how to talk about the climate with the amazing Catherine Hayhoe. Project Drawdown is the best place I know if you want to understand the big ticket climate solutions. So Project Drawdown is the 100 most effective solutions that are going to mean that we can avoid catastrophic climate change. Climate Outreach focuses on how you engage people, how you communicate with people. The two links through to the councils that I just put in the chat. So if you want to find out if your council is declared and what their action plan is. And finally, oh, I've put that twice, haven't I? How to have a climate change conversation. There you go, you get that one twice. And both Lincolnshire and Oxford have got some really useful sort of hubs. So if you're trying to think, well, you know, where am I going to find everything? Those are useful ones to look at. Right, I will stop sharing my screen. I know that's a lot in one go, but you've got a link through to the documents. You can explore them later, and we'll attach it after the conference when you get your thank you for coming email, so that you can take your time and look through that.